It's great to have you. For those of you who come back every single week, and there are many, many of you as well, you know that from time to time we take a little bit of a circuitous route to our topic. And today will be no disappointment as we get into this topic about dollars every year using certifications to create a self funding CTE program. I am going to start with the topic of all things of razors. So you see the razor up there on your screen. Now, this is a classic marketing puzzle. Every marketing program, whether you're learning marketing in high school, at a community college, at a university, you always hear about the model called the razor and the razor blade. And the question is, why is that razor, when we go to buy it at the grocery store, at the pharmacy, wherever it is that we buy those types of things, why is it so inexpensive? And the answer, I think we all know, is this: that the companies that make those razors know that once we buy the razor, we will come back over and over and over again for the razor blades. So they next to give away the razor to get us into the program, and they make the money on the razor blade. This is what we call in business a recurring business model. And I love recurring business models. Just a couple of examples of organizations that I've been involved with. If we turn the clock back a couple of decades, I was on the team that pioneered Wanderer security systems and infant security systems in long-term care facilities and hospitals. So I ran an engineering team that created a product. Some of you are familiar with it. If you've had an infant in a birthing center, or maybe a loved one who was in an assisted living facility who had a tendency to wander, what we do is put a tag on that individual. In the case of the infant, it makes it much more difficult for that person to be abducted from a birthing center, from a hospital. We can lock a door or deactivate an elevator. Same thing for the wanderer. We put the tag on their wrist and we lock the door, preventing them from leaving the facility. Well, the truth is that this entire system requires a security system. But in that business model, the security system was the razor. That was the part that we would sell to the customer because they would come back over and over and over again to buy the razor blade, that being that tag or that tab that was on the individual that we were trying to protect. In 2015, we sold our company, American Finishing Resources. That company was in the business of designing, engineering, and fabricating custom hooks, hangers, fixtures, and racks for the paint, powder coat, and industry, paint, powder coat, and e-coat industry. So what you see on your screen there is a version of that rack, and then you see a production part hanging on it. So we would work with a customer. We would design, engineer, and fabricate that fixture, and then they would use that fixture. Well, the truth is that over time, that fixture got full of paint, and sometimes as many as twice a week, that fixture would need to be cleaned. We had a fleet of trucks that drove all over the Midwest in 12 states and brought those fixtures from our customers back to one of our three plants. We had one in Indiana, one in Wisconsin, and one in the Quad Cities in Iowa. They would bring the fixture back, we would clean it and send it back to the customer. So in that case, our razor was the fixture, and the razor blade was this ongoing process of cleaning those fixtures over time. So here's our question for today. As we look at technical education, as we look at programs all over the Midwest and all over the United States, is there a razor blade model in secondary education when it comes to tech ed? And the answer to that question is yes. Let me give you an example or two. In the state of Wisconsin, we have what's called the CTE Incentive Grant Program, also commonly called Act 59. And if a certification, a third-party certification, is on this list, and the ones we're talking about today, by the way, are on this list, here's how the program works. If a certification was earned and it's on the approved graduating year certification list, and the students who graduated with that certification also have a regular high school diploma or a technical education high school diploma, their school is eligible for reimbursement for those certifications up to $1,000 per pupil, regardless of the number of certifications earned on the approved list. So for 2019, which is the last calendar year for which the data is available, this is how this worked. 322 students in the state of Wisconsin split up $6.5 million in funding. If you do the math, that is over $20,000 per school district. There were 7,766 eligible claims. And so the average student earned for their school district for every certification earned $837. This is a self-funding model. As these programs were implemented and the certifications were earned, those districts on average received $20,000 per year to reinvest in their technical education programs. So we also have similar programs, for instance, in the state of Minnesota, where we have the Certification Incentive Revenue Program. Now, this program, by the way, is scheduled to sunset in September of this year. We would love to see it renewed in the state of Minnesota. And just a little bit later, we'll be asking our guests about opportunities for self-funding programs in other states across the union. So the answer to our question of is there a razor blade model in secondary education is absolutely. And that is what we are going to talk about in part on today's episode of Webinar Wednesday. It's such a pleasure to introduce our two guests. First, I am joined by Ann Gilchek. Ann is the Vice President of NOCTI Business Solutions. That's the business and industry counterpart for NOCTI, and she's been part of that organization for nearly 15 years. In her role, she guides certification organizations in developing nationally recognized industry-based certification assessments through a rigorous validation process. Her organization also works with post-secondary institutions and workforce development organizations on a variety of efforts, and she's a former business education teacher, so certainly no stranger to the world of education. I'm also joined today by my friend Paul Aiello. Paul is the Executive Director of Education at Fanuc America Corporation. He's responsible for the company's Certified Education Training, or CERT program. We'll hear more about that today, working with educators throughout the Americas. He's led the strategic development of more than 1,300 automation and robotics training centers through academic partnerships with secondary and post-secondary schools and industry training centers. And Paul also has an extensive background in business development and national distribution, and has a combined 30 years of experience in business and advanced manufacturing. So both Ann and Paul, such a pleasure to have you with us on Webinar Wednesday. And Paul, I'm going to begin with a question for you. Many in our audience are probably familiar with Fanuc's CERT program, but many others may not be. Can you take a moment and just tell us a little bit about the Fanuc CERT program?
Sure. Thank you, Matt. Thank you for having me here today, and appreciate the discussion. So our CERT program really was developed out of the need by industry. Our customers were trying to identify people with the skills and the talent and the competencies that they needed all throughout the U.S., near in proximity to where they're located. So we knew that our training organization, which trains 6,000 to 7,000 people a year, couldn't keep up with the capacity that was being required in industry. So we sought out to proactively engage with schools all around the country, but to not have them teach with older antiquated equipment or donated equipment, but to give them the current and latest technology in robotics and CNC and automation, and using the same curriculum, the same tools that we use, the e-learning and simulation software that we train industry. So the goal was to develop resources that could build a pipeline of skilled talent close to customers. That was our charter for CERT. And over the last decade, the network has grown, and it's really turned out to be a wonderful opportunity for students to have experiences that lead into the industries that we work with every day.
So certainly grown to over 1,300 schools at last count, I believe, maybe even more by now. And students earning industry relevant certifications in the world of industrial robotics. Now, earlier we shared how several, in fact, many Wisconsin school districts are leveraging what we call Act 59 funds to get money back for their program every single year that the certifications are earned. Paul, I'd be interested, outside of maybe the state of Wisconsin, the Midwest, and even within the Midwest, do you see examples of other states leveraging this type of a strategy in their programs?
Yes, sir. There's a number. I wish there were more states that we were aware of, but there is certainly a number of them. In the state of Florida, they have a CAPE program, which is approved certifications. And if the credentials are valid and they meet their requirements, they can be put on the state approved list. And both CTE programs at the secondary level and post-secondary levels can get reimbursements for individuals obtaining those certifications. But we've also seen it in Texas and Tennessee. Ohio has a similar program as well. So those programs are there. They're not as well known, I think, as some of the ones that you spoke of. But we're trying to help identify those and make sure that schools understand there is a pathway for adopting these curriculums that lead to industry related certifications and vetted certifications that can allow them to obtain reimbursement through either state or federal funding.
Excellent. And I know we'll be talking a little bit later in the day, assuming we have time, about how people who are interested in doing these types of programs in their own states might be able to get started. So, Paul, we look forward to your insights on that. I want to turn our sights at this point to Ann and ask you this question, Ann. You know, these certifications are so incredibly valuable, but they also have to mean something, right? We have to know that as students are earning them, that they have the competencies that are represented by the certifications. That requires a very robust validation process. And none of this would be possible without the partnership between NACD and FANUC. So to help our audience better understand that partnership, can you tell us a little bit about what is FANUC's role in the certification process and what is NACD's role?
Sure. Well, thanks, Matt, for having me and inviting me to be a part of this. Really what FANUC's role is providing the industry experts in the field, and what NACD's role is providing the experts in test development. So I always say we are not the experts in anything except for test development, and we truly rely on all of our partners to bring those experts from their fields to the table so that we can develop, you know, an industry recognized credential, an industry recognized certification. What's really important to note is that it's not just important that industry recognize it, but the industry is a part of developing it. So when we first sat down to develop the certification program, we had the industry experts from FANUC at the table, and we go through a pretty rigorous process of developing a certification, and we really rely on those experts to tell us what does an individual need to be able to prove to us on this assessment to be successful and to be safe in this industry. So we go through a pretty strict validation process. We start with the job and task analysis, and I don't want to get too far in the weeds in our process, but that job and task analysis process is really where the experts tell us what needs to happen. And it's not just pulling questions together. Every question has to measure one of those standards. And then we do a pilot testing process where we ask schools and we ask people from industry to take that test so we can do an analysis on it so we really can see how everything is performing. And then the last step of that process is for us to develop and to determine the legally defensible passing score. So throughout the entire process, what's really important to us is to make sure that everything that we're doing is legally defendable. You know, we hope that that never becomes an issue, but it's really important that we have a process so that if anything is ever happen, we can say this assessment is content valid, and industry experts told us that this is what they need to be able to do in order to be successful in the industry.
So getting feedback from experts, from the subject matter experts in the specific competencies and responsibilities, performing that job task analysis to make sure that we know exactly what people are doing in the workplace and how those skills and how those competencies relate back to the education side of things, and then creating that legally defensible passing score and process for establishing that an individual has those credentials or those competencies. And I want to talk about that process itself. Can you share with our audience, how does that assessment process work if I'm a student or a learner? How does that work for the student? How does it work for a school who is looking to provide FANUC certifications to its students?
Sure. Well, any FANUC cert school can become a NACD testing site, and it's very simple. It's a simple form called a testing agreement, and we have you complete that. So we have the contact information for the person who's in charge at the school, and then they can place orders for tests. All of the written testing, so there are 2 levels for the robot operator. The level 1 is an online assessment, multiple choice assessment, and that's done 100% online, and it must be proctored. So you have to make sure that you have somebody in the room that's watching those students to make sure that we don't have any cell phones out and all of that. All it takes is an internet connection. So they just have to have workstations set up and a simple internet connection so that the students can test. The level 2 is a little bit more rigorous because it's a hands-on performance assessment. So it's important that you have an expert in the industry who is coming in to evaluate those students to make sure that they can show us that they know how to do all of those processes on the test. Instructors do have to be certified before they can order the test, before they can give the test, and they cannot evaluate their own students. So it's really easy for teachers to say, well, I know that he can do that, so I'm going to give him this score because I know that he can do it. But that's not how testing works. So they must be evaluated by somebody who was not their instructor so that we can get, a very clear idea of how they did on the test.
And I know when we're looking at funding these models through so many of these state programs, is making sure that it's not just somebody saying, yes, I like this person and they can do it, but having that specific process that an individual student has to go through to establish that they do indeed have the competencies is really, really important, especially when we get into some of these state funding models. I want to dig a little bit deeper on that topic, Paul Aiello. For those in our audience who are interested in getting a FANUC certification added to their state certification list, maybe talking to their state legislatures about creating a program like this. And for those that don't have that as an option, maybe even looking at what other funding models might be available. Tell us a little bit about some pointers that you would offer to our attendees today on those topics.
I think some of the key and relevant things whether it's a school or an industry looking to partner with a school, the key things of addressing funding within a state for these programs is to make sure that the curriculum that leads to credentials, that there's a firewall really between that. So one, the curriculum is industry curriculum. It's being taught to industry standards, and it's based on the individual learning the competencies, the occupational competencies required for these jobs. The other aspect is the firewall is that the certification is being offered through an independent third party that really provides a clear validation and the proctoring process so that we're not self-credentialing. FANUC provides the curriculum to the school. We train the instructor on how to teach that. The students learn the same content either at the school the same way they would at FANUC. So from that level, the content and the competencies are directly on par with industry, but the assessment that really measures the comprehension of that knowledge is independent. When those two things are in place, approaching a state board of education, a workforce board, a board of regents, depending on how the schools are managed throughout the state, those are the key elements that they look for. So really it's taking those forward to the different organizations. The Department of Labor within the state now is very much in line with the requirements of Department of Education. So I would say Department of Education, the Board of Regents, workforce boards, school can present those to them that they meet these requirements to be able to train these curriculums, offer these certifications, and get reimbursed. And if I can add just one last thing, the one reason that we really decided to work with NACDI to be that firewall and create these with us is that they are ISO certified to develop assessments, and they're recognized by the Department of Labor and the Department of Education to do all of those development and make it a rigorous process. So that's really what I would say to schools if they're going out in the country to try and obtain that.
And picking that right partner is so very important, as you clearly have done with NACDI. And I want to ask a related question to you. And, in the sea of credentials and credentialing, there's no shortage of credentials and certifications in the world of education. We all know that. Tell our audience a bit about what makes NACDI unique among other organizations that some might see as similar.
Sure. Well, first of all, we've been around for over 50 years, so we've been doing this for quite a while. So we've worked with business and industry. We've worked with secondary and post-secondary education. Actually, our very first product line was teacher testing. So we test teachers, we test students, and we test people in business and industry. So I feel like that's what kind of sets us apart at the company. Paul touched a little bit on the ISO accreditation, and that's really, really important when you're looking for a certification partner, is to make sure that they're ANSI ISO 17024 accredited. So there's all sorts of ISO numbers out there. Our particular number is 17024, and that is the accreditation to certify people. So our process has been accredited. So sometimes you'll see a certification organization that will have a specific test that will be accredited under ISO 17024, and that's great too. But our process has been accredited. So we work with probably 30 different certification organizations. So while I would love to say we only do advanced automation, we also do American Boat and Yacht Council. We certify anybody who wants to fix a boat. And all sorts of different organizations. So we really have a broad range of experience in this field. And that's not to mention our own credentials. So we have, over 150 credentials at the career and technical education level, secondary and post-secondary, for all of those programs that don't have a certification, so to speak, like a FANUC certification. There are all sorts of other programs where students also need to be able to prove that they have the technical skills to be able to, that they are employable. So that's what I would say is probably the most important thing when you're choosing a certification partner, is really to look at their experience and look at their accreditation and make sure that they have that accreditation behind them.
Yeah, experience and accreditation and track record, 150 of your own credentials, 30 credentialing partners. I've got to believe among those 30 that Paul Aiello has got to be at the very top of your list of favorites, although I won't force you to answer that question. And he's on our list of favorites as well. And one of the reasons is he's so very creative in finding ways to get to the end, to create these great opportunities for students. And that's not always a straight line, is it, Paul? When you're working with these organizations and certainly students who are certified in FANUC robotics, considering careers in automation, to maximize the self-funding strategy for the benefit of those students. How can schools certify more students in traditional STEM classes? And specifically, I know you're doing some really creative things in the areas of computer science and coding.
Yeah, well, great question. And there is a tremendous amount of interest in industry to obtain students with these skills. And I would say that part of that is, we had to look at different ways to create experiences. And you know very well that what really drives the career paths for students is experiences. It's not teachers or counselors or parents, it's what they do. So getting this into high school, not just CTE, but more of the traditional high school programs, how could we do that? So we worked with, I think we have about 12 states now that have approved FANUC robotics programming or FANUC CNC programming as a foreign language elective. So now, I know foreign languages are very important, but this is really a foreign language. Learning how to program this has all the syntax of a language and things like that they'd have to learn. So students have an opportunity to not only learn how to program a robot, but also have that meet the requirement for a foreign language elective. We've also done that from coding. Learning computer coding is another area that is requirements in many school districts. These programs are a code in themselves to understand how to code or program a robot, and now PLCs and CNC machines, they all fall in that same realm. And I would say this, that, creating these experiences really can be eye-opening for a lot of students that say, boy, this isn't what I thought it was, but this is great. And I think we win either way. If a student says, this is something that speaks to me, I want to go into it, or if it's something that the student says, boy, this isn't right for me, then we as educators, and if I could speak as a whole, have really won, because we're helping that individual find what speaks to them. And I think programs like this, if schools can look at this in this way, where the student who goes to the school, whether it's high school or they pay tuition at college, they are not your customer. You are really producing a product. The school is producing the blades, if I can use your analogy, right? The school is really the razor, and the blades are the individuals. Well, industry buys those blades. They want those students with the right skills, and they will come back to those schools constantly if they know they're producing the talent that they need. So our whole mantra has really been alignment. If we understand the talent needs of industry and we can help schools develop that talent, then we've brought those two into alignment. So
Leave it to my friend Paul Aiello to one up me on that analogy, the razor blade analogy. That was a beautiful example, Paul, and thank you. And I think it's important to point out, these students go on such a variety of different pathways. Some go direct to workforce, some go on to their community or technical colleges, carrying with them certifications that can get them a head start when they get there, actually earning credits in many cases toward a degree before they even step foot in the door of the community college, and also to universities, as we'll learn later this spring with some students that took these courses while they were in high school and went on to four-year engineering pathways as well. So what a great example, and a great way of showing that if the goal is big enough, that means creating these experiences for these students. There's so many different ways that we could find to fund them. Now, Melissa, I can tell just by watching the dashboard here that we've had the questions piling in from the audience, and I'll turn it over to you to pose those questions to our panelists today.
Absolutely. Thanks, Matt. And thank you to everybody who already submitted questions. Again, if you do have additional questions, pop them in the chat. If we don't have time to get to them, we will make sure to reach out and answer them with you personally one-on-one. Just to get through some of these questions, Paul, we did have a lot of people asking about their specific states. So I think we mentioned it already. Department of Education, Department of Labor, Workforce Development, those are all great places to look to see if your state offers these programs. Now, we did have an instructor who was teaching FANUC in Canada. Do you happen to know if Canada has a similar program, or if you don't know, where can this person go to find out?
Well, I'm not entirely sure, so I don't want to give any wrong advice, but I do know they have a very robust training program. We work with a number of schools throughout Canada. I'm not entirely sure how they do any type of funding for that, but we can put that individual directly in contact with our Canadian office and our educational consultant out of Canada that may be very in tune to how programs are funded there.
Perfect, thank you. Anne, this question I'm going to direct to you. This person said, if we already have the testing center approved for NACTE, are we covered?
Yes. Yep. When you go in, you just type in, when you go in to place an order, you type in FANUC and the FANUC tests will come up. So as long as you are a cert school and you are a NACTE testing site, you are all set.
Perfect. Thank you. Now, we have a really great question that came through that I think, certainly is not, and I'm just going to paraphrase this question because it was typed very long, but the concern is that some states are trying to push away from product-specific certifications, and how can, as we approach our states about these certifications, how can we address the pushback against product-specific certifications?
If you don't mind, I'll take a first shot at that. So I would say there's a responsibility on our part. As FANUC, we're the market share leader in industrial robotics, bar none. Same with CNC. And we felt that it was a responsibility to partner with education and give them the curriculum to train on that. Now, I understand that a lot of schools want to be fair and say, well, we want to teach on all robotics, but employers are very specific on the technology that they want the individuals to learn on. And I would say this, if a school has an advisory board, that they should ask that advisory board in a makeup of their industry partners, who are mainly the employers within their geographic region, ask them what technology is important to them. If it's robotics, which robotics? If it's PLC, which PLC? If it's CNC, and what they teach should represent their employer base, because again, they're producing a product for those employers, which is to make those individuals hireable. And sometimes when you try to make a generic platform, you may capture concepts of automation, but you may not capture the specific requirements. And the goal is, when somebody walks into a company, you don't want them to be a deer in a headlight. You want them to say, boy, I saw and I worked on that piece of equipment and I understand how that works. That's what gives that employer an asset on day one.
Great, thanks, Paul. I think we have time for one more question. I really like this question. What kind of living and what potential incomes can these students make coming out of school with a FANUC cert?
Great, great question. So we have examples of that from all around the country, and I wish I had time to share all of them, but I will tell you that we have schools, if there are opportunities for students coming out of high schools that have earned certifications, a lot of them with dual enrollment, that they can walk right into the workforce and get starting salaries in the 40, 50, $60,000 range. Students coming out of community college moving towards an associate's degree can easily obtain salaries in the $60,000 plus range. The problem we hear from community colleges all around the country is employers find out about their program and they try and hire the students before they graduate. So there's a lot of that going on because there is high demand for these opportunities. So if you take a student coming out of high school, 16 or 18, 19 years old, that has industry relevant credentials and walks into the workforce, they're making a living wage. They're not making minimum wage. They're on an excellent career path with a lot of upward mobility. So exciting area. I'll tell you, I wish he had these programs when I was back in high school. It'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you there. All right, to all of our attendees, thank you for putting your questions in. We will make sure for those of you that we didn't get to your question that we will get it answered for you via email. But for now, I will leave things to Matt to wrap up.
Thank you, Melissa. Certainly a hot topic. Just watching these questions roll in is fantastic. And to Melissa's point, we'll make it a point to get answers off of the air for those of you whose questions we were not able to answer today. I want to thank, first of all, our guests, my friend Paul Aiello, the Executive Director of Education for FANUC America Corporation, and also Ann Gilchek, the Vice President of NOCTI Business Solutions, for just a great discussion. Really appreciate the two of you being with us. And again, based on the number of folks that registered for this webinar, the ones that stuck around to the very end, this is a really, really hot topic. So we were really pleased to put it on for everybody. We're looking forward to next week as well. We are going from robotics and automation and certifications and self-funding CTE models this week to aquaponics. That was a new term that I learned in the last couple of weeks. And we will be joined by two individuals from Superior Fresh, which are making, I'll tell you because I've had it, the best lettuce you will ever eat. Their citrus splash is amazing, but they do it using aquaponics, basically a combination of horticulture and raising fish. So it's fascinating. And there are ways that we can teach this technology as well in our high schools and our technical colleges and in our universities. So we look forward to that topic. Until then, as you know, we're here every single Wednesday at 2 p.m. Central, and we will see you all next week.